a personal story. I was sitting in a cafe in Kyneton about 15 years ago. I was sitting with a guy who was doing his PhD in environmental philosophy, and I was with a lady who was a supervisor in environmental philosophy, and he was talking about what his PhD was. And while we were there, I said to them, if I ever did a PhD, I would do it on humility, and I would really love to investigate the beauty that comes from people living humbly under God, living humbly under, in the service of others, and living humbly in the service of the environment. And this was an environmental philosophy PhD. I subsequently started that and then put that thing down. Maybe I'll pick it up again one day. But it's interesting that the capturing of humility is just isn't it such a powerful, beautiful thing that we observe? I don't know if everyone's heard of Augustine. Augustine was born in 354 and he died in 430. So he lived a long time ago. He was one of the most significant thinkers of his day. He wrote a number of books, and many people believe that he basically set up the way the Western world functioned for the next 1,000 years. So he's one of arguably the most profound influence on Western civilization over the last couple of millennia. Obviously, under God, that's true, and he was inspired by the work and word of Jesus. So I don't want to put him in too high a place, but he was a significant guy. And when he was asked the three most important virtues, he replied, humility, humility, humility. He described the vice of pride as a huge mountain that stands in the way of our contentment, our joy, and our personal fulfillment. That mountain, he advised from personal experience, must very seriously be feared and carefully avoided. The mountain of pride is an obstacle that dazzles you with its light and height. Beware of its siren songs enticing you to climb the proud pursuit of empty glory. That climb will not only cast you down, for within there is nothing substantial or solid, and with a cracking of the ground beneath, it collapses and swallows up those who are walking above, puffed up with themselves as they tumble headlong into darkness. Augustine famously said, the foundation of all virtue is humility. And Jesus talks a lot about humility, but before we jump into some of the scriptures, Ray's just going to share some historical context from one of my favourite teachers, actually. He's John Dixon. He's both a historian as well as a theologian, and he's going to unpack a little bit of the historical context to humility in the Christian faith. Thanks very much.
John, we want to talk about leadership and how people view leadership. But in the Greco-Roman world, how did people view leadership then?
Well, there are different kinds of leaders, and I think you can tell what a culture really values by the leaders that it elevates and honours. And surely there were philosophers who were regarded as great leaders, the Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and so on. And so these were revered for their intellectual prowess and were honoured as such. But certainly by the time of the first century, it was pretty much a military culture. And so in Greece and Rome, which had had centuries of very little but fighting people and establishing their rule over different kinds of people, by that period, the greatest leaders were, of course, the military leaders. And this blended with the early imperial period, where the great emperors were military. I mean, you almost, by definition, had to be a military man to be emperor. So, of course, we all know about Julius Caesar, Augustus. And so this ability to conquer was at the heart of leadership for Greeks and Romans, in this very period. Wealth, I think, would be another marker of a great leader. And so if someone were exceedingly wealthy, which probably meant their family was well connected with power, then they were also accorded honour and were regarded as leaders and benefactors. So they were people that you could hang off and receive the crumbs from their table, as it were.
Yeah.
So philosophy, military, political power and wealth were what leadership fundamentally was about.
Did the way they saw their gods, or the Greek gods, did that influence how they functioned in a leadership level?
Well, of course, the Greek gods were warriors, and so you read the Iliad, which is the classic Greek text, and the Greek gods are very good warriors. And so there's a sense in which they led the way in military prowess, but one could better describe that as the gods reflected the ideals of Greece, the military Greece. But the curious thing about ancient Greek and Roman religion compared to the modern notion of religion is that ethics wasn't really connected to God. The gods weren't that interested in how you lived, other than that you gave them due honour through offerings, through the various rituals, through marking the days that were set aside for that god. But how I treated you was just not part of the mix. The connection between ethics and belief in God is one given by Judaism and inherited by Christianity, and via that given to the Western world. Our very notion of religion is different from how Greeks and Romans viewed it.
Wow. If you go to the person of Jesus, so Jesus comes into that culture, how did he shift our thinking about leadership? Because it's quite crucial, wasn't it?
Well, Jesus comes into an environment where you've got the greatest empire the world had ever known.